Welcome to the Mirror Media Podcast.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Mirror Media Podcast. We're doing a new live stream. We're joined today by Vineet at Philosopha on Twitter /X and on YouTube. He's got a YouTube channel. We'll post that up. And then we also are joined by King Kong, also from Twitter /X. We have interacted for a long time now, guys, online, talking back and forth about philosophy, about history. And we thought, you know what, let's do something live. It's been a minute, and we can have people come on. So what I'll say to everyone is thanks for joining. And what we can do is, if you guys want to just come on up, or ask questions, please ask questions. And if we know you and you're cool, maybe we'll let you come into the live stream to talk to us. So we'll do that. So, hey, Vineet, why don't you introduce yourself real quick?
Yeah, before that, Mukunda, great. It's a great pleasure to be here. And as you said, we've been in contact for, I think, last 2 years, discussing philosophy and stuff. So pleasure being here. Last year I did my master's in philosophy, and I have done my, I did my graduation in 2022 from Sanskrit. So from early on, I think I developed a keen interest in our Indian tradition and philosophy and trying to understand it. And at last, I think 2 years back, I thought, why not give it a shot? Let's get a degree, academic degree in philosophy, so that I could be more have those required credentials as well, going on YouTube and other social media platform, presenting views on Indian philosophy and other stuff. So
Right.
This is pretty much what it is about me.
Okay. And King Kong, why don't you introduce yourself to whatever extent you want to.
Hello, Mukunda. Thanks for having me over here. It's been a long time. We have been discussing about everything under the sun, from philosophy to theology, how myths shape cultures from the east to the west. My interest in philosophy comes from my background in my childhood, reading about different mythology. And with the passage of time, it just grew and strengthened my interest in trying to understand the nature of things that was being told through these myths. And from there, I came to the realm of philosophy, pretty much like the early Malaysians. So from there, I entered into the realm of philosophy, studying about nature of reality, specifically the nature of consciousness had intrigued me for a long time. My background in academia is I did my bachelor's in history and my master's in archaeology and ancient Indian history. So that would be a brief introduction to who I am and my interests in these areas. So again, thank you for having me over here, and I think we'll have a great time and conversation over these topics.
Oh yeah, for sure. You guys hear a reverb on my end?
Yeah, I think there's an echo.
I think that's okay. Cool. All right, so I think we're good now. Okay, so excellent. We wanted to do today's episode on a few things. I think we want to start with kind of like a rough introduction to like Eastern and Western philosophy, and talk kind of generally about philosophy itself, but also getting into some contingency argument issues, right? We find with the West and the East and how they're different. So, yeah, you guys want to go ahead and kick it off?
Yeah, I mean, I think we should start with Indian philosophy and then gradually delve into the differences between the Indian way of doing philosophy and the Western way of doing philosophy. So briefly put, the standard narration about how Indian philosophy started uh, is chronological in a sense that they take for granted the Aryan migration. So obviously we wouldn't go into that. Whether that's true or not, that's up for a different video. So let's grant that's whatever academia takes a position around that. So you have this Purv Bhag of the Vedas, the mantra portion. A lot of, I think, even now the academic consensus is that there's not much philosophy in it. So I mean, I wouldn't challenge that. Let it pass for now. The philosophy that we know, like the way it is presented even among the masses or in academia, proper philosophy starts around 600 BC. That is the Upanishadic time in India. So that's when the Upanishads were written. The Upanishads like Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, the Chandogya Upanishad, and that's also the time when you see the Shramanic traditions coming into the picture as well. You had Buddha, you had the Jainas, and they were ready to go in a battle with the Vedikas or those who upheld the Vedas as a valid source of knowledge. So you had Buddha, you had Mahavira, you had also the Charvakas, and I think this is, in academia we call it the classical period of Indian philosophy, which roughly starts from 600 BC and extends to second century AD. And till the second century AD, we had these systems, and they were, in an environment where they were debating each other. You had in the Buddhist text, you have the mention of Sankhyans and even theistic models as well. And after the second century AD, you have the Sutra period when the sutras were being compiled. These sutras would then later go on to become the foundational texts. So you had the Nyaya Sutras, the Gautam Nyaya Sutras, you had the Sankhya Sutras, and other sutras as well, even Madhyamika Sutras, for example. And from then on, you had the Bhashya period, where you have all these stalwarts, the famous Indian theologians that we hear about, the Shankaras, the Ramanujas, and the Madhvas. So this period is, I think, we can call it the Bhashya period. So if we have to, categorize the entire narration of this, historical development of Indian philosophy, we can divide it in three segments: the classical period, which starts from your 600 BC onwards and extends to second century AD. Then the Sutra period for roughly 200 and 250 years, and then the Bhashya period, which then culminates or ends in the a complete disquieting of Indian philosophy. So
Yeah,
this,
I mean, so I think these dates, I think they're roughly generally correct based upon modern academic standards.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a range, right? At the end of the day, like the Vedic period is generally put in between anywhere from 1800 to 1200. Now, I mean, I think some of my perspective is I think some of the Upanishadic stuff goes back pretty late or pretty early, however you term it, into the second millennia. Because all other scholars, like Japanese scholars, I think is I forget his name, but he wrote about like the Upanishads being closer to Buddha's time. I think it's a little earlier than that, but that's fine. So at the same time, and this is interesting because Indian thought, definitely it's the case that the Upanishads were not very much like a syllogistic kind of engagement, right? They weren't as premise A, premise B, conclusion. They, in some sense, they're almost. We're being anachronistic, but like they're Socratic, in so far as like there's a conversation between a teacher and a student, and you have these deep, complex conversations around this, around ideas, right? Some of the same ideas the Greeks are talking about, like the nature of being, the nature of reality, and But there's also some things I think the Indian tradition does a better job in, especially which is the epistemology. Even at that time, they're very concerned with the ways we know, how we know. So I think on your general overview, it absolutely makes sense, and it's correct. And I think I think sometimes people think Indian philosophy only started with let's say the Vedantic period, and I think
No, yeah,
there's but we
that's a
know
common.
that it's a common myth, right? And but there's at least a millennium and a half of
Yeah.
philosophical development before the, let's say, Vedantas of Shankara, right? So if you,
Yeah, I mean, before Shankara, can we say historically, Mukunda, that there was like, flourishing Vedanta? We can't say Vedanta system
you
before
can,
Shankara.
you
We
can.
can, but it wasn't widespread like the other
Well,
schools.
yeah, I mean, there was definitely Shankara himself refers to people like uh, uh, Dramila, Tanka,
Yes.
you know,
Baruchi.
yeah. So there's a whole list of various Vedantins before Shankara, and there's a good book, that Japanese scholar, again. Let me pull that up. He writes about this pre Shankara Vedanta. Um, let me see. Yeah, Japanese scholar. I have his book, and I forget. Hajime Nakamura. Yeah, I read that book a while back. This is back in
Okay.
20 years ago. It's called, um, you know, uh, 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 Sh- uh, Advaita before Shankara or something like that. He has 2 volumes. They're really massive. Um, Okay, so we have the same development around the same time. You have the Greeks kind of building their philosophy roughly around the same time, right? Whether you're going to pre-Socratics, Parmenides, Heraclitus, Anaximander, all these guys, Anaxagoras, all these guys before the advent of Socrates,
Socrates.
Plato. Yeah. And it's similar because like you find in their worldview, they talk about the one element. I think this is an axiomander. He talks about water. And again, this is something I forget. But
It's Thales of Miletus.
Thales, yeah.
Thales, yeah. On the
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So I'm audible, right?
Yeah, you're good. But
Yeah,
you
you're
have
good,
to.
but you have to.
I think your headphones.
Does
are
the
giving
reverb?
reverb.
are giving reverb.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was Thales of Miletus
Yeah.
who first ventured forth to claim that the prime substance of reality, the arche, as they would call in Greek, is water. So we do see a beginning of this ruminations about the true nature of things, about the prime substance of out of which reality is built, and you see this and interestingly, this is not in mainland Greece, or at least how we would in today's modern times think of mainland Greece. This is happening somewhere in Ionia and in modern day Turkey, right? And so from there you see this substance based schools that rise up. Now there's a debate that do they separate from their previous mystical traditions. I think there's a nuance in that, which is also the case for our Vedas as well as the philosophical schools that have branched out forth. And I would like to discuss more on that. So yeah.
Yeah, we definitely can. So, okay, Vineet, do you have any thoughts to follow up here?
Yeah, just to quickly mention about the parallels. So I think a couple of years back, I was reading about how the reincarnation. I was thinking when I read, how come the Greeks accepted reincarnation, because you don't see that in their classical texts. It must have come from somewhere. And after a bit probing, I got to find out that okay, it was perhaps an influence from our side, perhaps an influence from Jainism, Hinduism, and as King Kong said, because it was the Mediterranean trades were happening. It is usual that these exchange of ideas were taking place, and somewhere we might have influenced the Greek tradition as well. I mean, reincarnation does suggest that a clear-cut influence from our side on the Greeks.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, it could be the case. I'm not entirely sure. I mean, I think reincarnation might have been a much more prevalent uh, idea in those times across the world. Um, but again, I'm not sure how that plays out. Um, it is interesting because the Rig Veda itself doesn't really talk that much about, or if anything, or the Vedic mantra samhita, anything really much about reincarnation. There's some passages that one can view as being like a kernel of rebirth or samsaric. But again, it's the question we have to ask ourselves is that the purpose of the Veda Samhita or not? And if it's not, then it won't be present there, obviously. Now, definitely the idea plays out in the Upanishads, and I think in some level the Brahmanas, Aranikas too,
Yeah.
and then really gets its full flush or uh, building out during post Upanishad time in the Itihasas, in the Puranas, and even the other later traditions of philosophy happening there. So I would say that at least by the time of Buddha, it's pretty prevalent across all of India, and the Jainas also accept that, and so on.
Yep.
So okay, on this point, okay. Of course, there's a lot of interaction between the Greeks and the Indians post Alexander, right? That's really where you see a significant period of time in which there's influence back and forth with the various uh, people talking about the gymnosophists, as they would call them in Greek. Probably connecting to some level to the
The
Shamanas or
Digambar, yeah,
sorry, go ahead.
the Digambar Janas.
It could be. I
The
mean, I don't know if they necessarily, because I don't know if the Shwetam the Gumber was already present then.
Yeah, that could be a contention. Yeah, you're right. Maybe
I would
the
just
split
say
might. Yeah,
my sense would be ascetics on the whole were probably very similar to
Digambar.
that. Yeah. So I would say that would be the case for what I would think. Like the ascetics are the ones that are just talking about generally. Now, I don't think they really demarcated between Buddhists, Jains, Hindus. I don't. By the way, I don't even know if that demarcation would have existed back then the same way.
yeah.
And so you have that interaction. But the interesting thing is, I think a lot of people argue that Pythagoras, at least Pythagoras, might have had some deep influence from some sort of Indic tradition because
Yeah,
he
it was.
also.
Mhm.
Well,
In fact, it was in context of I think Pythagoras that I mentioned that, because before him you don't really see this concept of reincarnation or a tendency towards asceticism. So definitely you're right there. I mean, in pointing out that maybe it was Pythagoras from whom he became the channel of this amalgamation of Eastern and Western ideas.
Yeah, it's interesting because Pythagoras does have some commonality with a lot of the Indian ascetics. For example, no meat; they were vegetarians. Even in fact, I don't even think they ate beans. So maybe it was Jains. Maybe they got it from the Jains because there's some element of certain root vegetables they wouldn't eat. And you see there's a deep focus on nonviolence. Yeah, but the interesting part is like their fascination with numbers. I don't think that's a Jain
Yeah,
issue. I think that seems almost Sankhya, by the way. I mean,
yeah, enumeration. Yeah,
yeah, the idea of enumeration. Um, but it's very interesting because I think the interplay between these traditions over the course of at least half a millennia was pretty fascinating. Yeah. So okay, we have a general sense of. So Vineet, did you study Western philosophy too when you were in grad school, or was it mostly Indian?
no, it was mostly Western. Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, people would think that if it is established in India, an institute, then you should be the focus should be more on Indian philosophy, but no, entirely Western. Somewhere here and there, you get to learn that to just Advaita Vedanta.
which is very
Rarely you, yeah,
yeah. No, you go ahead. Go ahead.
yeah, Advaita and Nyaya. That's all. Bits of Buddhism, but apart from these schools, Advaita, Nyaya, they don't. Yeah, they don't give much focus to Indian philosophy.
How's that look? I mean, it's such a weird thing in India, like the focus on Western philosophy, and no, almost nobody knows anything about Indian philosophy, right?
That's right.
It I don't know. It seems
That's
very
unfortunate, yeah. Very
sorry.
unfortunate.
Yeah, it's
Very
very
unfortunate.
unfortunate, and it's not just very unfortunate. I think it's such a disservice. Like the land with this is like if you go to Greece, you go to university. I'm sure they're teaching you Greek philosophy, and that's not happening in India. But my own sense is like, frankly, I think there's a problem with Indian scholarship anyway, a large part, and people are going to give me grief on that. But I think Indian scholarship on the whole is not as good as Western scholarship when it comes to a lot of this stuff.
We could say that, yeah.
I mean, you could say anything. The question is, do you agree or not? But
No,
actually, you don't have to say that because, like, I don't know if you want to go get your PhD or something.
I mean, yeah, I mean, I was myself appalled by this, dearth of scholarship. Not scholarship. I would say there are great scholars in Indian academia that have, that are still bringing up these old ideas, trying to present it in the language of modern Western philosophy and modern Western logic. For example, you have B.K. Matilal. If anybody is
Oh yeah,
interested in you, personally, if anybody is interested in Nyaya philosophy, and if you want to read Nyaya in the contemporary logical way, where you see the shades of analytical philosophy, then he's the scholar. And I think he himself has led other scholars to follow his path, like Jordan Graneri. He's a Western scholar who got influenced by B.K. Matilan and has written quite a lot of work on Nyaya philosophy. So the scholarship is there, but uh, it doesn't take the center stage has not been able to take the center stage in academia yet, and not only in academia, even in popular social media setups and conversations as well. And that's very unfortunate, because let's say you're giving space to couple of philosophy. Let's say you're talking about Nyaya. Let's say you're talking about Advaita. But then that's not where the philosophy, that's not even the tip of the iceberg. What about other philosophies? What about Dvaita, Vishishta Dvaita, Shuddha Dvaita, Sankhya, Jainism, Buddhism? Maybe, just two chapters, they do not do the service that these philosophies require. And compared to this, more focus is given to Western philosophy, as I mentioned. So in comparison, we need improvement in scholarship for sure, or in the curriculum, in the syllabus. Yeah, that is there.
yeah. I mean, I think it's such a disservice to Indian thought and its impact. And this is one of the important reasons why like even doing this, the conversation is important to me because I don't think there's enough people in the West that know anything more than Advaita Vedanta insofar as oneness and oh we are all one, we are all love, we're and you're like, well, sure, that could be true, but there's a little more complexity here and way more engagement and thought over the past, 3 millennia on these ideas, right?
Yep. I mean, I recently did a video on this. I always had this thing that, yeah, whenever you're talking about Advaita, the only thing that you mention, and it has become so cliched. We are one, as you said, but there's more to it. Go in the nuances, dude. At least start indulging with these with the logical arguments that they were giving. They were not merely making claims; they were trying to prove it as well. Once you do that, you would, because this is so peculiar to Indian philosophy. All these philosophies are interconnected. If you start going deeper into Advaita, you cannot stop but to start going deeper into other philosophies as well. You would have to quote Nyaya, you would have to refer to Sankhya, and that would span all the philosophies of the tradition automatically. So, yeah, I mean, that's a point we need to consider.
Kong, thoughts?
Oh, absolutely. I think I agree on most of the part that Vineet and Mukunda you have stated about the condition of Indian philosophy in academia in our country. Uh, First and foremost, I feel that a lot of philosophers and thinkers are untouched. People just stop at Madhvacharya at the most. They don't know about Navya Nyaya, Gangesha Upadhyaya, Raghunath Shiromani, these giant stalwarts who were developing their logic almost to the level of modern analytical or proto analytical philosophies, as well as making room for the rise of modal logic. But alas, it was discontinued after a certain point of time due to various factors. These guys were operating in the 17th, 16th century CE, and just not the recent most Indian philosophers of different schools, but even the ones that are of antiquity, as well as from the classical times. How many people have read Udayanacharya's works on Nyaya Kusumanjali, or how many have delved into the depths of how Sankhya literally makes its way into the bare framework and the skeletal structures of not only Vedanta but as well as Tantra. I mean, I think it's known that Tantra does operate and stands on the pedestal of Sankhya as well as Vedanta too. So these nuances are lost. These interconnections that Vineet mentioned about, that once you're reading a philosopher from a particular tradition in the Indic context, you just can't strip him apart from the causal chains of dialogue that has brought him to this particular position and from where it would lead in the future. So this bird's eye view is lacking in Indian academia, but I'm optimistic that in the coming generations, people will be inspired by academicians like Matilal, Janardhan Ganeri, as well as the old heavyweights, student S. N. Dasgupta and all. So yeah, that would be it.
Go ahead, Vineet.
Yeah, I mean, if you try to, you know, draw a parallel, I could, when I was doing my preparing for my entrance exam for the masters, I was able to see how much of the Indian philosophers were ahead of their time. I mean, the debates that took place during the modern era of Western philosophy between the rationalist and the empiricist. So on one side you had the rationalists, the Leibniz, the Spinozas, the Descartes, and the other side you had the empiricists like John Locke, Berkeley, and others. If you take that debate, I can, or anyone who is well versed in the tradition, can show you the exact debate that took place in India verbatim around 7th, 8th century, like almost 600 or even a millennium ago on the Indian turf. So that's something that needs to be brought out. That look, to a certain point of time, we were well ahead of the West, and as King Kong mentioned, if hadn't it been for the invasions, probably our logic, the developments that happened recently in logic, in Western philosophy, the modal logic, the predicate logic, probably, and with all sincerity, I can say that we would have definitely made those trailblazing inventions before them, 100%.
Yeah, I mean, these counterfactuals are always tough for a couple of reasons. Like I think one, there was, I think there was some level where I would say there's some stagnation happening around anywhere somewhere in the 15th to 17th century, 18th century Indian thought, right? In terms of at least on logic and philosophy, I don't know if I can necessarily blame the invasions for or uh, the beginnings of colonialism. I don't know if that would be fair. I think there was a part of me. A part of me will say there was this sense of um, complacency, maybe, because at some level the Hindu tradition had gotten rid of everything else insofar as like defeating them in logic, right? There weren't many Buddhists left. There was the Jains are a small population anyway. They didn't actually. It's funny, interesting enough to me, they didn't actually debate Muslims. You don't find very many like texts in which they even deal with Muslim issues, right? Like or their arguments. And I think there's something telling about that. Maybe they just didn't think that was worth it, or um, or also, frankly, maybe the traditional matas and their paramparas and sampradayas didn't care. Their focus was different. I don't know, but I just don't. I know for a period of time there wasn't really any massive development in terms of the philosophical. They were arguing with each other about minute points, right? Right. You might have now there are some great thinkers in that time period, like Raghunath Shiromani. A bunch of these people during that time period that did write interesting. Like I think Gangesha was probably, when was he? 15th century,
12th century,
12th century, and then how about
14th century. I mean, yeah,
14th.
almost that time.
Yeah, and then we also have what's his name, Vijnana Bhikshu, I think was also roughly that time.
15,
Yeah.
16th.
Yeah, and there are a few. I'm not saying there wasn't. There was definitely some movement, right? But
Oh, yeah,
it just
this point that you mentioned. I mean, what do you think? Why? I mean, you touched upon it, but if you could, lay out a particular reason. I have always tried to understand why didn't they indulge with the Muslims? Why is it? Was it like less dharmic for them to indulge with the militias? I'm sorry for using that word, but you could get the sentiments that they might have had during that time.
But I'll tell you what's interesting is they do. So even if you consider, like, let's say with the Greeks, right, the Yavanas, right, when they incorporate Greek thought into Hindu thought, for example, astrology, like there's like 4 astrological systems or 5 astrological systems that are considered traditional. There's Brihat Samhita, there's Asuri Siddhanta, and then there's also what they call is Yavana, and then Romaka, right? Or these are like the 4, and they incorporated both like astrology that came from basically Greece, and that included when they kind of adopted quite a bit of their zodiac, because I think that's the Indians took that. But secondly, I would say is later on when the Muslims came in, they had their own form of astrology, and during that time period, they actually did include what they call Turkish astrology, like a particular type of astrology coming from the Turks. So I don't know why they didn't really engage philosophically. A part of me would say is maybe they didn't think it was that sophisticated. At least at the level of regular people in the subcontinent. Because I'm trying to think, like, even the great philosophers that came out of the Muslim tradition, like Al-Razi or Ibn Sina, or any of these guys, right? They mostly came out of like the Persian culture, but more west than they were east, right? I'm trying to think if there were any strong philosophers coming out of, let's say, Afghanistan or Pakistan or India, what we now call those countries. Do you have a sense? Do you remember?
I mean, as far as I have read, or maybe King Kong can explain or maybe put some of the names from the subcontinent, but most of them have been from Iran, from the outermost part of Afghanistan. Take Avicenna, for example. Ibn Rushd was from Spain, and so not much from. You're right. Maybe they didn't have these stalwarts in India for them to compete with the Muslims. They never
Right.
thought they might. Maybe the Muslims were never challenging a theological, coming off as a theological opponent or a philosophical opponent in India, probably.
Yeah, and I think that could be the case. I mean, it is funny. They're still arguing with Buddhists at this time, and there were barely any Buddhists, in India around this time, right? They're arguing with like the ghost of the Buddhist traditions, but nonetheless, I mean, I do think there was. And frankly, the funny part is, even today, this day and age, we still don't see very many Hindus engaging with
The
Muslim
Muslims
thought,
and the Christians. Yeah.
which is weird, right? Because I feel like that needs to happen, given our such different perspectives on the world and or even Christian thought, for example, like which hopefully we can do over time on these spaces, and also engage with Muslim thought. But yeah, it is a fascinating detour, because Muslims and Christians did kind of engage with each other, but not as much as I think they should have, given their proximity. Kong, Vinny, thoughts?
Yeah, Kong, would you wanna take this up? Like,
Yeah, I think after the 13th and the 14th century, you do see philosophical strains like percolating. For example, I can remember Vedanta Deshika from the Sri Vaishnava tradition, Parashara Bhatta, the entire tradition of the Dvaitins, Madhvacharya, Jayatirtha, and so on and so forth. But I think I won't call this. Like, I need to think about this, whether this was a drawback or rather it was just they had a different perspective to things. The menu argument that you mentioned, Mukunda, I think that plays a big role, because the pramanas of the shastras or the scriptures became like the rules for the dwelling ground, and it was within those domains that they engaged. And of course, the ghosts of not only Buddhism but I guess Sankhya as well as Mimamsa, which of course it was not, let's say, in contemporary times how we would see destroyed, but rather it was incorporated within the functional tradition that was available there. But with of course, due to different factors, conditions, whether that would be invasions or change of social cultural norms towards dharma as such, based on the times, I think the mathas as well as the philosophers, including the mystics who had their one feet in theology and metaphysics, for example, Madhusudana Saraswati, they brought in the element of bhakti and more of worship and let's say mystical understanding of reality, rather than terse, dry arguments. It's not that those are mutually exclusive, because time and again a lot of theologians and thinkers have shown that they can be tied in and married harmoniously with each other. But yes, I think there was a certain drop down, maybe not in the most extremist form, but surely it from a gushing flow of river, it became to percolating streams of thoughts. So that's just my perspective.
Yeah, I mean, again, going back, I just think it's maybe that was par for the course. Again, they're talking at different wavelengths. Like, if I can't accept this is also very interesting, right? Like, at some level, when Buddhas, Jains, and Hindus would debate, they would leave Shastra out of it. They would leave Shastra's particulars out of it, right? They would really talk about Shastra on the whole, why this particular pramana didn't make sense. So they could have used something similar with Muslims and Christians, right? Being like, well, the Bible, the Quran, again, the familiarity is, I think, the issue, right? Like, how much of the Quran was translated into Sanskrit, the language of debate and engagement and intellectual discourse, right? How much of the Bible was translated to Sanskrit? And I don't think it was, right? So, like, these scholars who really focus on these languages as their means of philosophical communication and philosophical engagement wouldn't want to engage there, because they just don't know the languages, and those texts weren't in the language of Sanskrit, and vice versa. Although it is interesting, because the Hindu texts got rewritten into Persian throughout time, right? The Mahabharata, the Ramayana, Upanishads. I think Darasakot didn't he do one of those? Yeah. So it's very fascinating that that happened that way and not reverse. So I'm not sure. That's actually a good point to think about. Okay, so any more thoughts on this?
No, I mean, I think that it's going to be a mystery, maybe for years to come. And why didn't they? They were there. The Muslims were there. First time you're encountering a different faith, because you had been debating with the Buddhists. The Buddhists rejected the Vedas, but here you could have a debate with a theistic school that is Avedic, non-Vedic, unorthodox, and yet we didn't see any dialogue. But that's, I don't know. That's a mystery. We
Yeah,
can only speculate.
it is very fascinating.
Or probably we we can take this prejudices into consideration. The Malaysia tag. I mean, again, not to be offensive, but that's something we do see in the texts, that it is used in a way that they already would have thought that these guys are not perhaps capable enough, or maybe they're so fewer in number that yeah, they didn't any pose any threat per se.
But that being said, this is something we need to deal with now, right? So I would say let's do that. In the next bunch of series, jump out into
100%.
particular Islamic thinkers and thought and their philosophy. Because I do remember I did a live stream long time ago, 3 years ago, with the Dawa wise, guys. Man, that I think I lost some brain cells with them at some point. Look, there were a couple good guys that I thought were philosophically sound, but they're too tied to their presuppositions and their textual vision of the world. And secondly, I think the big problem with them has been historically even their live streams, and this is why they're so disingenuous. And I would never want to do that. Is even in their live streams, they try to read the text, the Hindu texts, in a way that is not how Hindus read them, or how the language understands it. They read it as if it's like a literal statement of truth, or they make the mockery of it. One could do that with any religion or any tradition. And I think it's stupid to do that, frankly. I think you should give the best reading, or the reading that the tradition themselves gives, and how they try to understand it. Because ultimately, no one wants to deal with a stupid straw man or intellectually unrigorous interlocutor. So, in that sense, I want to do my best to present whatever tradition or whatever ideas, in their full light as they themselves understand it, and maybe the best interpretation I could give them too, because that's where your arguments are refined. So I think in our engagement in Muslims or Christians or Jews or Buddhists, anyone else we want to engage with, we should do the best we can in representing them, and also responding back to them.
Absolutely. And I think in the coming videos, we can do that. We'll surely do that.
Yeah.
So far, it hasn't been done, I mean, from the Hindu side, as far as social media is concerned.
Yeah, I've seen a few, I saw this, I think it was a long time ago, this conversation it was between Sri Sri Ravi Shankar and
Yeah, Zakir Naik.
Zakir Naik, which brother, this.
Yeah.
It was
That was long ago, like decades ago. Yeah.
Yeah, and there was one or two other ones I've seen, and I've always found for example, I saw this dude Amish Tripathi on Oxford, whatever, the Oxford debate, and I'm like, why do we let these people talk for Hindu philosophy, right? It's he writes a book, fantastic, but what does it do with anything about Indian philosophy, right? And then every single time people talk about Indian philosophy, it's only Advaita, as if Advaita Vedanta is the only thing that's come out of India in 3,000 years. And I'm like, sure, that's the one you guys all know, and that sounds really interesting and unique to everyone, but it is just one of many schools. And in fact, although people argue it's a prevalent one, I actually don't know if it is. I think people intellectually just kind of accept it, but sure, I'm not sure if it is the prevalent one.
Yep. I mean, yeah, I mean, it's better if you can get experts on the stage and let them talk about Indian philosophy. Let them indulge. Let them have debates with the Muslims or the Christians. Let them examine. Sure, you have written books on Indian history, Indian culture, but you're still far away from being a expert on Indian philosophy.
King Kong, thoughts?
Yeah, I think I'm on board in on most of the points, if not all. Looking forward to the future series on trying to delve more deeper into this. And I guess it was just a small, tiny break in the 4,000-year saga. And, because we are here, our texts are here, the thoughts are over here. And I would, extend this respect and gratitude to not only to the tradition of our land, but also to the polytheistic pagan quote unquote traditions of the West. I think that has also suffered in the limelight of Christendom as well as Islam. The individual or the ideas of Plato, Aristotle, Plotinus, Proclus, all of these Western stalwarts have been read through a lens of Abrahamic understanding of these ideas, which I think is is okay as far as the historical development has been done, but it becomes a genuine disservice to these thinkers on their own originality and the background from which they have sprung from. So I think, but again, as we say, it's just a break, a kink in time that we can, come back again, and here we are.
Yeah, in fact, Mukunda, if we like as we move forward in this discussion, the viewers would be able to see what is going to come in future with our videos, because we are going to examine the contingency argument, and it baffles me that you have this argument in our tradition, given by our theologians, discussed about as well. But then in the scholarship, be it Western or Indian, you don't see any representation from our side as far as this argument is concerned, or as far as any cosmological argument is concerned. It is like either it is the Arabs or the Aquinas or Augustines who have contributed, and they don't mention us at all. So this can change. This needs to be changed.
Yeah,
Let's
I
discuss.
would. I would
Yeah, go on.
absolutely. Yeah, I would absolutely agree. And I think over the course of next few weeks, months, whatever, hopefully maybe years, we'll get more of this stuff out here. So on that point, I think let's talk about a couple things. I think although I call this an introduction to Indian philosophy and some Western twists, like I think this is going to be a series on that. I don't think we can cover, obviously can't cover all of Indian philosophy in one go. But I will say, like, if we're going to talk about the contingency argument, can you guys, present a good contingency argument from the West? And then how do we have it in our traditions?
Sure, yeah, let's do that. If you could, if you can get the
Yeah,
slides.
let me see. Okay, so this is one. So let me share. One sec.
As you're doing that, I mean, I can just briefly give the context why we chose this contingency argument for this video. So I think 4 months back, recently, Lalan Top hosted a debate between Javed Akhtar and some Maulana guy, and while they were debating, the Muslim side, they brought up this contingency argument to prove that God exists, or God is the necessary being. So in that context, let's have a discussion. Do we have a contingency argument of our own? Do we have Indian philosophers, Indian theologians talking about contingency argument or cosmological argument, or trying to prove the existence of God? So yeah, let's do that. Could you go to the next slide, the next image?
Oh yeah. 1 second.
You'll have a slide on the Western version of the contingency argument,
Okay.
Aquinas
All right.
on.
Let me do that. Actually, yeah. Let me see. You have. Oh, yes, here. Oh yeah, here we go. This one will work. No, not that one. Sorry. Hold on. And there we go. At the stage. There we go. That one, right?
Yep, this one. So, yeah, as I said, I mean, I'll present this, Western version of it, and then we'll go right into our version of it, or what our philosophers have, had in their bag regarding this argument. So, as you can see, I mean, it's a fairly simple argument. People might think that it's something, there's some rocket science involved in it, and you know, but on face of it, it's very simple. You have dependent things that exist in the world. Any one of us can't, nobody can deny that. The phone in my hand is dependent. The microphone in my hand is dependent. So the first premise is very simple, that contingent objects exist. To be contingent is to be dependent on something else for its existence. And then you had other premises that argue that you can't explain contingency, you can't explain dependency by invoking another dependency. So you have A depending upon B and B depending upon C. You would want to say, well, what's the problem if this goes to ad infinitum? Like, what's the problem in that? But then PSR, or principle of sufficient reasoning, gets violated. Uh, PSR is the principle which basically says that if anything is dependent, or if there is a possibility of explanation, you cannot arbitrarily put a stop. You have to complete the explanation. So if there are dependent things in the universe, if you are dependent, I am dependent for my existence on the atoms, and the atoms on subatoms, so and so forth, you cannot arbitrarily stop this chain. You need something that is independent to complete the explanation, and that's how the argument concludes that the necessary being exists. So this is the Western version of it. If you want to trace back this argument, you can trace it back to Plato, you can trace it back to Aristotle, you can trace it back to the Arabic philosophers, as this you can see in the slide. On the right top corner, you have Ibn Sina. So he's also one of the people who formulated the modern version, the modern Western version of the argument, and it is quite famous. Particularly his proof, which then was taken up by Thomas Aquinas. Aquinas developed it in his own language, with the Thomistic or the Christian flavor, and then that's how it reached our current time, and that's how it is debated currently. So this was the gist of this argument.
Okay. So basically, what we're arguing here, if a contingent being, or in this sense, a dependent being exists, that's premise one. Premise two: all dependent / contingent beings have to have a cause, right? And three, the cause is, you would say a final cause here, right? At least there has to be the sufficient cause. Would you call that the final cause here, or just how would you define that cause?
You could call it the final cause, but we would rather call it sustaining cause, a cause that is the ultimate sustainer of the dependent existence. So this cause, it's very important to note in the context of contingency that the cause need not be temporal. Even if nothing comes about temporally, even if nothing begins to exist, even if we are living in a block theory where everything is just freezed up, everything is freezed out, all moments are freezed out, and there is no change happening, even then the contingency argument can work, because it would still ask what on all these contingent things dependent upon. So you have to bring up this ultimate sustainer, or the sustaining cause.
So let me ask you this question. You post here, I mean, it says here, the universe, which is composed of only contingent beings, is contingent. Is it contingent?
The universe?
Yeah.
It has to be. If
Why?
if the universe is made up of contingent things, then it has to be contingent in itself. There has been objections to it. So Bertrand Russell famously argued that, well, if you guys want to say that, then you're committing the fallacy of composition. You're saying that if a machine is made up of small parts, then the machine itself has to be small, which is a
Right.
fallacy. The machine can be big. So
Right.
even if the universe is made up of dependent parts, the totality can itself be independent. What's the problem in that? And yeah, that's a fair retort. That's a fair objection. But then existence is not like is not properties is not like those properties that are measurable. It is not about size. It is not about your weight, right? Existence can't be measured. It's a quality that transfers from the parts to the whole. So if I
So
give you the
I guess my
example,
question would be, why can't the universe itself be the sufficient cause, even though it's composed of contingent parts? It's not just the contingent parts.
as I said, I mean, exist. If you look at this property of existence or the phenomena of existence, imagine a wall which is made up of, let's say, 10 or 15 bricks. Obviously, if you're talking about those properties that are measurable, so you can't say because the bricks are small, the wall itself would have to be small. No, that doesn't follow. The wall itself would be bigger than the bricks because we're talking about measurable properties. But if I talk about the color of the wall, if the bricks are red, the complete wall would be red. Color is not something that you can measure. It's qualitative. So when you try to map the non-measurable properties like existence and color and these properties, they get transferred from the parts to the whole. I haven't come across any philosopher who can point me an example where these properties like existence and colors and others were not passing on to the totality, right? So
Mhm.
because there doesn't exist a case like this, we have good enough reason to suppose that if the parts themselves do not have existence, the universe itself would not have existence.
Okay, if the parts
Also.
themselves do not have existence, the universe does not have existence.
Yeah, and one
Because,
more. Yeah.
but is it because the parts are passing on existence to the universe? Is that how it's being approached, as opposed to, let's even say the Sankhyan view, right? And I'm like Prakriti is considered fundamental. It's not contingent, right? It
Yeah.
just is. So if it just is, then the parts that come out of it, the evolutes, whatever you want to say,
Yep.
are gain their existence from the prakritic existence, right? So
That's
in that sense, like I feel like it's a weird thing to me because dualism, as quite honestly, we've seen much of the Muslim and Christian world adhere to, wants to postulate a separate thing other than the universe that is the cause of the universe. As if this has always been my problem with this contingency argument is, well, if the universe itself is a thing before all things, then why aren't all things getting their existence from the universe as the thing, right? It's the only thing we know, in the sense of like the only thing we can experience. I mean, none of these people are arguing you're experiencing God. They're arguing that you're experiencing the universe, and they're inferring God. But even that inference is a product of our. I mean, they don't believe this, but I'm just saying from Sankhya, it's part of the mind or the buddhi, right?
so. I mean, that's a fair objection. I mean, that's a very strong objection. If you say that, dude, I accept that there are contingent things that particular existence are contingent, but what about matter itself? What about the Sankhyan Prakriti itself? Can the Prakriti not about its forms? Sure, the forms are contingent. They might have failed to exist, but can matter itself have failed to exist? Can Prakriti itself have failed to exist? Um, the modern logicians would say might say yes, as long as you don't have the necessity or the necessariness inbuilt in the very definition of prakriti, it could have failed to exist. But if you switch it, if you add a Sankhyan flavor to it, and if you say prakriti is independent in itself, necessary in itself, uh, then I think I would have to, or we would have to concede that yeah, it can be necessary. Then you don't reach to a personal deity, and that is a drawback in the contingency argument.
Yeah, I mean, I just see that as being like, it's as if they don't even consider that possibility, really. That the universe is in and of itself a necessary thing.
Yeah, we can say that. I mean, there are atheist philosophers, however, who have considered this. So
Sure.
Bertrand Russell is one of them, and there are other thinkers as well in the West. But as far as theists are concerned, yeah, they wouldn't. I mean, they don't have any reasons uh, to do that.
Yeah, because the sufficiency argument is first. I mean, I think part of the problem is some of this stuff is assuming a counterfactual, right? Like there can be a universe without these things, or the potential for this universe not to exist, or because contingent. I mean, the flip side to that is we exist because there was no other fact but for the existence of that thing, right? There is no necessary being that causes existence to be. It's just this is a brute fact of the universe that we all exist where we're going to exist, where there was no other situation where that would have been otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we can say that. We can say that. But then, I mean, you can't also deny that the powers of imagination, they force you to confront a possibility where you could might have not existed at all. And as long as this possibility remains, there are modal arguments for contingency where they would say, because these possibilities remain, because I could think of a world where Vineet doesn't exist, where King Kong doesn't exist, where Mukunda doesn't exist, where this entire setup never takes place, you all are contingent, you all are a possible entity. And because this possibility remains, uh, it becomes imperative that there should be something that makes us actual, makes us exist.
So what I think is interesting here is I think if at some level, it just hit me now. I think the structure of the Sankhyan system solves that problem relatively easily, because it does exist. Those possibilities exist. They exist in our mind, and in that mind, that existence is real, right? Like it's not like this. The mental existence is any less real than the physical existence. Now, so in the sense of saying that possibility of, I can picture a world in my head in which King Kong doesn't exist. Okay, it's real. It's real in my head. I mean, people laugh at this. Oh, yeah, that's just imaginary. It's whatever. But break it down a little deeper. You're like, well, if it is unreal, then how does it affect me? How does the unreality of a thing cause real changes in my psyche or real changes in my physical nature or whatever it is? Because the one important premise within all thought is the unreal cannot affect the real, right? If it's not real, it's like saying that nothing changes things. You can't have a negative that doesn't exist change something that does exist. And I would say in that sense, like if you're being able to affect by mental states, intellectual states, emotional states, all in the realm of thought, those are real things, and that reality does happen, right? So that again, that contingency argument falls apart at that point. It's, well, my thoughts are real, and my thoughts in the realm of thought, this reality exists. So in other words, I'm just saying the same thing again, which is it's all necessary.
Yeah, could be. I mean, we can. Sure, that could be a competing view. Why not?
I mean, what are your
Think
thoughts on that? I mean,
yeah,
your thoughts. Yeah.
personally, Mukunda, I have. If you would have asked this to me a couple of months ago, I would have been on your side. I would have said, yes, I mean, you're right. Contingency argument falls apart. But the more I think about the premises, the more I think about possibility and how I, as an entity, do not hold existence uh, in me in a sense that my essence does not necessitate that I should exist or this microphone should exist. The more I ponder upon it, I think it's a very hard nut to crack. I feel the atheists uh, can only hand wave, with all due respect, can only hand wave this argument, because the premises, I think, are more probable than not probable. Plus, most of them are true premises. So the argument on face of it looks valid to me. I mean, I even what you said about the concepts, the things being not entirely non-existent. So when you think of, let's say, something that doesn't exist in the actual world, it exists in the mind as a reality, to which these philosophers or the realists, because you're taking the idealistic position, the realists, like the Nyayikas or the Dvaitins or the Vishishta Advaitins perhaps as well, those who believe that there is a real world out there independent of our consciousness, they would say that, look, what is affecting you when you think about these non-existent entities is the existing thought about them. So you're not being affected by those entities per se, but by the thought which holds the content of those entities. So you're getting affected by the thought. So if I tell you, oh, there's a ghost behind you, the ghost doesn't exist, but because that comes as a concept in you, now that concept becomes causally efficacious, and it starts, influencing you in a way that you become scared.
Right. So on that point, it's never the case that when I think of something, it exists in the world. So, for example, the unicorn I think in my head doesn't exist in the world out here, but it's no less real because it still exists in the thought. That thought affects, well, provides some causal power to my to the stream of everything that plays out here, right? So it's never that the thing. So this is again where I would say, like, there are gradations of reality. I mean, not gradations, there are realms of reality. Sometimes they overlap, sometimes they don't, but they're not like competitive realities or hierarchical realities. They just are. And so from that perspective, I'm playing, I'm still working through my thoughts on this, but I'm just playing the devil's advocate on this, or even engaging in the conversation, which is ultimately, it's all necessary. There's nothing that's contingent. The entire universe, the way it plays out, could not have happened but any other way but this way. The beings that are here could not have not been here. The very nature of their essence is that they were going to be here or to exist or to whatnot. That's I would actually be like, that's a argument I can maybe agree with.
I mean, sure. As far as monoism is concerned, if you're a monoist, King Kong is a monoist. I'm sure he would be waiting for his. Yeah, let's just go to him.
Yeah,
King
go
Kong.
ahead. Go, kick on. Go ahead.
Certainly, like monism comes with a lot of flavors, just like any other thought processes. So I'm not an absolute substance monist, more of like a priority monist. I have firm intuitions. Again, we all deal with our intuitions. That's the friend we have in these 3 a.m. conversations. But so my idea would be more of like a priority monist, where the fundamental principle of the necessary being is one, and that alone provides you know motion, or provides being to the derivative entities that emanates out of it. Having said that, so regarding the universe, I, I think the issue that you guys were discussing comes from the fact that if we consider the universe to be completely in all of its parts and all of its building blocks being made out of contingent materials, so if the entire shebang is made out of a conglomeration of contingent materials, then it is fair to say the universe is contingent. However, if by the universe it's meant that there is a certain kind of a background from where all these things emanate or emerge, then I think that necessary being would be the, quote unquote, the universe, which is seen amongst both atheistic as well as non-theistic acceptors of this argument. If you look at Graham Oppy, who is one of the most formidable as well as brilliant defenders of naturalism and atheism in today's contemporary times, you would see that he does accept the contingency argument, but with a caveat. The caveat being that the necessary being is the singularity or the initial state of the universe from which everything emerged. There are a couple of other non-theistic friendly alternatives like the quantum fields, meteorological simples that cannot be further divided, that exists on its own, something similar to Sankhya, uh, the universal quantum wave function, which is the necessary being, and due to its collapse in different modes, the different realities or branches of realities emerge. Uh, so that would be from, even if granting the premises, how we see from the non-theistic understanding of things. Regarding the possible worlds and the modal worlds, there has been a lot of ink spilled or on how to imagine or how to conceptualize these realms. Uh, so if I take Mukunda's idea that these are nothing but projections or thoughts of our mind, and taking the Sankhyan view, those are made out of subtle matter because those are also Prakriti. Having taken that and having taken the entire series being necessary, we do see that even granting it, there are two kinds of necessities. One is necessary through something else, right? That it couldn't have been otherwise. But, however, it derives its dependence from its previous member, previous of course, in a non-temporal sense. So you can have an entire necessary emanation or a necessary flow out from the necessary being, but all of those would be necessarily dependent upon that entity, the first mover. So that's how I see it. Uh, but though there are other ways of seeing the necessary being in the background of this argument. Of course, there's a second part of the argument is on the theist's shoulder to show that this necessary entity is a sentient mind that governs the universe and all. So yes, that would be it for the time being. That's how I see this argument eventually leading to.
Go ahead, Beneath. You have any thoughts?
I mean, he presented the monistic view quite rightly, uh, but then just to push back a little from where I come from, or from a realist point of view, I could still say that if you're a monoist, and let's say there's just one substance that exists, and that substance is necessary, then in my view it kind of collapses the entire distinction of contingency and necessity. So from my point of view, if you're a monoist, I think you should not run the contingency argument. You should be the last person to use the contingency argument in your favor, because uh, at the end of it, you're going to say that everything is necessary. So what's the point of using it? And I'm saying this because a lot of people uh, do use it. So if you go to the Islamic academics or the Islamic philosopher tradition, a lot of them were monoists, and because they were monoists, it never made sense to me why were they using contingency argument in the first place. uh, because like Sankhya, they're all going to say in the end that there's just one substance, and all the contingent objects are made up of that substance only. So if that's true, uh, then that kind of collapses the entire distinction between necessity and contingency, which kind of runs counter to the entire contingency argument. So yeah, I mean, what do you think about it, Zeno? Like, do you think that that's a problem with the monoistic traditions?
So I think there was a slight misunderstanding, I guess, from my part in presenting my thoughts. So, whether whether I'm a priority monist or not, I think that was not the point that I was making in the argument. I was rather showing that even if you take the entire chain of causality as necessary, still the person who is making the argument from contingency or dependency can run the argument its full course. Secondly, I don't presume that all things are made out of substance of the same substance in the sense of, of substance monism. It's just one blob from which it morphs into different things. You can very well have a monistic principle in the sense that it is the ground of all things and it unites all things, and the relation between the dependent entities on the principle is more than of having each of them having their own existential inertia. It is rather the other way around, where the dependent thing depends upon the necessary being thoroughly for its existence, almost like the shadow and the sun. Now, again, analogies and language do get, gets us tied up in these areas, because we are trying to think or conceptualize entities that are beyond the pale of our day-to-day seeings. But having said that and keeping that aside, I do think that even if you run the dualistic, or let's say the pluralistic understanding of reality, and through that you run the contingency argument, you can make a case that still there's an independent being, in spite of the entire chain of causation being necessary at the bottom. But again, that would be a different argument, but it does come under the family of contingency arguments. So I think that was a bit of misunderstanding or a lack of elucidation from my part. Yeah, that's what I think.
You know what might be interesting is I think the Nyaya argument for motion is actually pretty interesting to discuss.
Yeah,
So
we can, if we can bring that up.
Yeah. There we go. Second. There we. So this is. Oh, that's sustenance. Sorry. Remove that. Let me add. I think that one is really interesting. Give me 1 sec here, guys. I don't know why that's all coming up. Promotion. Okay, that's the first one. Okay, yeah, I got it. Share screen. You guys continue talking. You know, like get this done.
All right. So, I mean, we about this, motion argument. That it, yeah, right there. It's very interesting. When you go to the contingency argument given by shades of the contingency argument given by Nyaya or Udayanacharya, with all due respect, we can say, or I can say, that it's not that sophisticated if we bring up the contingency argument given by Dvaita. But as far as this argument is concerned, the argument from motion is it's pretty much sophisticated. As you said, it's also interesting as well. And there's a parallel in Greek philosophy. So Aquinas took it from Aristotle. Initially, Aristotle is the one who gave in Western philosophy the argument from motion, and it's quite similar. And then you can see the parallels between Udayana's argument and Aristotle's argument. Kong, do you want to say something on this, like the motion argument?
Yes. So a couple of points that I want to lay out is this entire this fascination about contingency argument does stem from the Hellenic tradition. especially from Plato and through Plato to his disciple Aristotle. Now, Plato, as Mukunda was laying it out at the beginning of this stream, that the Upanishadic dialogues have similarity, or it shares in its language and its mode of conversation with the Socratic dialogues. And Plato doesn't lay his arguments out in a syllogistic manner, or let's say in a rigorous manner like that of Aristotle, but he does have the idea that there's this form of the good which underlies, in the sense of it grounds all forms, and all the material realities are nothing but shadows of that. And even the argument of from parts and wholes that you would see flourishing in Plotinus's writings, the Enneads, you do see its stem, its seed in the thought of Plato, where he is first to, well, I don't think he is the first, but rather one of the first thinkers to postulate that the god, or the form of the good, or even the gods for that matter, are simple. And from there, it derives that it has its own independence rather than composite material wholes. Aristotle takes it from there uh, to an entire different domain of motion, because his own metaphysical worldview, the scaffolding on which he stands, is based upon the idea of act and potencies. So all things are necessarily made out of acts and potencies. Now, made out would be a loaded word. I'm not talking about in the sense of how physical things are made out, but rather in a metaphysical sense that things have these distinctions of act and potency. Potency meaning the latent power that a thing has to be something different, and act being the actualization of that latent power in the current moment or in its current state. And Aristotle shows that this entire chain of dependency of imparting act to a substance that has it in its own potential cannot go back to infinity, right? Because a thing cannot bring itself into act unless it's acted upon by the other, because no things in this scenario that we see around us is made out of pure actuality. It must be acted upon. And so in this hierarchy of series of acts and potencies, each causing or each sustaining or igniting the force in the other, there must be an end point, or rather a beginning point, if you see it in a different way, that infuses this power of actuality in all these things. And for that, for Aristotle, that entity is the unmoved mover. Now, the interesting point that a lot of people overlook is that neither Plotinus nor Aristotle, or even Plato, from whom this began, does take into account the idea that this series must be temporarily fixed. You see, this is not something. This series doesn't go back in time, because all three, and within the greater Greco-Roman tradition, they assume that universe is eternal. However, even assuming that, Aristotle shows, or at least tries to show in his book, The Metaphysics, that there must be a graded series of sustaining causes that keeps this eternal universe going on. And that boils down to the unmoved mover. Now, of course, Aristotle tries to tease out what the nature of this unmoved mover is, but again, that we can keep for the further part of the discussion. So that would be my 2 cents.
Yeah, if you take that Aristotelian argument, and if you analyze this argument that we have here right now on the screen, you could see that I feel they are exactly the same. And what Udayana is trying to say is like saying exactly the same thing, that things go from potential to actual. And if everything is made up of material, so since we have been talking about Sankhya a lot, I think it's something that all these philosophers have taken up from Sankhya, that there is a distinction between consciousness and matter. So anything that is made up of matter, anything that is jada, cannot itself induce in its own being motion, right? It cannot go from by itself from a state of potentiality to a state of actuality. And I guess the premise, uh, I think the premise two talks about that because these atoms are material. I mean, that's what Udayana is trying to say, that if these atoms are material, they can't move themselves. You need a conscious mover, or you need something that, like Aristotle would say, something that is always purely actual. And what is that remains purely actual other than consciousness in our experience? Because consciousness does not require anything external to it to induce motion. Again, motion here is a loaded term. A lot of people would think that by motion, Udayana or Aristotle, they mean uh, the metrical motion that physicists talk about, which you can measure. Uh, that is included, but perhaps the term has a wider scope. By motion, these philosophers mean anything that changes, anything that goes from one state to another state. So if there are atoms in the universe, if they are changing in their position, they're changing in their even in their temporal states, then there has to be something which brings about that change, because they themselves cannot. And that's how the argument leads to.
It is interesting because within like the yoga schools, the Sankhya schools, motion is connected to the element of vayu, right, which is inherent in the Sankhyan tradition. So their response, I think, would be something to the extent of, well, no, there is that motion is an element of prakriti, so things can move on their on the causal element, right? And now, again, the interesting part I would say is the Nyaya, that Nyaya takes as a foundation that Ishvara exists, right? Because they even, like, even at some level, they can't even say that Vedas themselves are a Apodushaya that way, right? They have to attribute to Ishvara as being the cause, the final cause of all things. So I do think there is, even within Indian traditions, right, which is very fascinating, you'll find these demarcations. I think the Jainas also, by the way, take that motion to be intrinsic. I think intrinsic to their viewpoint. So I would say, like, the motion argument, I've never found that very interesting. I've always thought, whether it's done by Aristotle or Udayana, I was just like, it doesn't do much for me, because if ultimately the argument is going to start from the some position of, if you accept that the universe is anadi and is causally determined since beginningless time, then there is no mover outside of the movement happening between material things.
Well, yeah, sure. I mean, that's again a good objection to this, and that's why, I think it didn't get much air, like the contingency argument, perhaps because you can have motion intrinsic to the material world, as you said, or to one of the fundamental particles, like the Jainas propose. They talk about pudgalas. So these fundamental subatomic kind of particles can induce motion in each other, or can be forever in a perpetual state of motion by themselves since eternity. That can also be a possibility,
Right.
without ever the requirement of a timeless being or a pure actual being. But
Yeah.
nevertheless, it's quite a famous argument.
It is. It's very famous, right? This is the whole idea when people say the unmoved mover.
Yeah.
So a lot of remember growing up, a lot of Christians they would use that argument around God, and it always struck me as kind of being not very strong. Frankly, I just was like, why does there need? I mean, so much of philosophy, I think, is definitional, right? If you like a statement like unmoved mover, you're just defining a mover of a different type, which is fair enough, true, but does it really tell you anything? Like, I'm not sure. Like, it just gives you a prior state of, like, it wasn't affected by something else. But clearly, a moved mover will have to have some movement on their part because they decide or whatever. But anyways, I'm going into a whole nother issue. So let me bring up the next one. I think this will be good. Do you guys want to do Udayana's sustenance argument, or do you want to go
So
Dvaita?
let's go to the Dvaitin version of the argument, and
Yeah. Okay.
we'll also, yes, we'll
Okay.
have
Let's do.
something related to what we were discussing earlier, which is that we have, we can show the developments that have taken place in the Western world in our Indian philosophy as well.
Okay. So this is Dvaita contingency, right? This one.
Yep, yep. This is, yeah. So the Dvaita contingency argument. I mean, we saw the Nyaya contingency argument, and before that we saw the Thomistic or Avicennian contingency argument. Um, but my line of reasoning is that, as we were talking about, how we are going to bring videos where we would discuss these things, bring up these things, that our tradition is as rich as the other traditions, be it theology or philosophy. So here we have an example to kind of prove that point that we were making earlier. So the contingency argument is not foreign to this land. And in fact, I would argue there is a particularly, I've provided a slide as well, where there is a particular mantra in the Vedas. I think it is in the Vishwakarma Sukta, where uh, Vishnu is, indirectly mentioned, where it is the indication is towards Vishnu, that on his navel stands the seed of this creation, or the seed of this creation is established on his navel. The navel being a metaphor, obviously, which can be anything, basically his sustaining power. So you have the prime, the fundamental insight of the contingency argument directly in the Vedas, where the Vedas are indirectly calling God or Brahman as the ultimate sustaining cause, which we earlier talked about, how contingency argument wants to prove a grand sustaining cause behind everything that exists, behind everything that is contingent. So something similar we have here. The first premise says that there are dependent existence, similar to the Western version of it, that there are contingent objects. And I think, with all fairness, most people wouldn't have a problem with this premise. They would let it pass easily, uh, because what else is what else is left on the table? If you disagree that contingent objects exist or dependent objects exist, then you would have to say, like the Advaitins, that all that you see, the plurality, is Maya or Mithya, which will open different Pandora's box altogether, uh, ultimately boiling down to the conundrums related to what grounds the illusion, and so on and so forth. So that is out of the way. You have the dependent existence. How do you explain that? In order to explain, can you explain it through another dependent existence similarly to the Western version of it? No, you can't, because if A is dependent on B is dependent on C, you land in a vicious regress. The regress cannot terminate until you bring a swatantra entity to explain the paratantras or aswatantras. And the argument concludes that the swatantra entity can only be unique, and it can only be one. And because it is a Vaishnava theological model, they conclude that that entity is Vishnu. Something very interesting, in the Arabic world, as well as Thomists are concerned, like Aquinas and others, they too want to argue that there can only be one independent entity. There cannot be two independent entities. And you see the same thing being argued by Jayatirtha and Madhvacharya as well, or the Dvaita tradition collectively argues that there can only be one independent entity. If there are two independent entities, then they would come in each other's ways, and one would have to be finite. So, an independent entity can't be finite. Therefore, there can only be one. As far as this particular argument is concerned, sure, it is not as sophisticated, as rigorous as the contingency argument, because a lot of people can object. Modern atheists do object, like Graham Oppie, that what's the problem in having many independent entities, many necessary beings? What is the problem? And do you have a deductive argument for it? So far, I can concede that that requires a further task. But as the argument that the way Jayatirtha has presented it in his commentary to Tattva Sankhya of Madhvacharya, I think the argument works. I argued previously, I would be on the same position that presented in this way, the argument works. And a very interesting thing, Mukunda, related to your question, let's say an atheist asks, can you prove that the universe is dependent or contingent, or anything in the universe is dependent or contingent? If you can't, then we don't agree with the first premise. The speciality of the Dvaitin contingency argument is this, that it escapes or bypasses this question spectacularly, like in a very uh, special way that I don't see happening in the Western tradition. For example, you can say that I'm making the argument in a pure a priori manner. I do not care if anything exists, because I can make this argument in a way that is purely a priori, which does not, harks back to experience or anything that can be experienced. So even if the world doesn't exist, I can still make the argument, and he does that. And I've provided us, I think I provided a slide as well, with the heading that, comments on contingency argument. The logic is very simple. If we talk about kinds of possibilities, and if I say that, or that's how Jayatirtha puts it, he says, look, there are only three possibilities. Either everything can be dependent, everything can be independent, or they can be circularly dependent. Note that if I present it this way, I have not made any premise that talks about the universe or particular existence, right? It is purely a priori, in a sense that you have these three possibilities, and because these three possibilities are conceptual, even if nothing exists outside, we can still make this argument. And I find this very amusing, something that's peculiar so far, something that is peculiar to our tradition. It is also there in the Arabic tradition, but the way he has placed it, the way Jayatirtha has put it out, it's brilliant. I mean, you can see the slides. Everything, either everything is dependent or circularly dependent, or everything is independent. Each one of them are untenable. Everything is dependent. Yeah.
I would say number three is not untenable, because I mean the argument could be made ultimately, like, you have infinite beings sharing of all one purpose.
Well, sure. I mean, you can make that argument on a general basis. It would seem that, yeah, that suffices to kind of, make a roadblock in front of this
So
argument.
I'll
But
give you an example. Even in the Vaishnava tradition, Sri Vaishnavism, in the Vadagali tradition, Lakshmi is independent, Vishnu is independent. They are mutually self-sufficient beings, but they are together Brahman, right? The nature of reality is them. Now they're one and the same in one sense, and they're two separate. They're separate in another sense, but they are independent. And so within that tradition, they don't limit each other because they share the same idea, purpose, vision. I wouldn't say mind, but let's just say that. But they are independent, right? They're
yeah,
inseparable, but they're independent.
sure, that is the case. But uh, the initial point that I was making, at least the earlier objection is bypassed. We could at least recognize that, because this argument is purely conceptual. The atheist cannot retort, oh well, prove it to us that the universe is contingent, because none of the premises make the claim that the universe is contingent or anything is contingent.
Right.
It is a conditional.
It just
Yeah,
shifts it to everything, or it just shifts the word, right?
yeah, it is talking in the domain of possibilities. It is saying that either all are dependent, this is a possible set. Everything is independent, this is a possible set, or they are circularly dependent. The first two is, I think, on the face of it, it is absurd. I mean, and we all can see the logical improbability or even impossibility related to this proposition that everything can be dependent, because it runs into infinite regress, lest you are a Buddhist or you are Buddha, who would want to say that no, we are fine with the regress, we can have dependent existence. Cool. I mean, if you want to have that, sure, you can have that. But then, as I have noted, you would have to sacrifice on a very important principle, which is the principle of sufficient reasoning. So if some Buddhist would say or would retort that, you know what, we can have dependent existence. What's the problem? A depends on B, B depends on C, ad infinitum.
Mhm.
Something, uh, you know, s- uh, On face of it, it might not look problematic, but then as far as the whole set is concerned, we can still ask to the Buddhist, fine, this kind of reasoning explains the particulars, but what explains the whole series itself? Because remember, the contingency argument does not only want to solve the problem of dependency, but it also wants to solve the problem of why is there anything at all? Why is there something rather than nothing? So if the Buddhist reply that A depends on B, B depends on C ad infinitum, we could still ask, what about the entire series? Why does the series exist? Why does this on what does the series itself depend?
Yeah,
And
and their response would be, well, that's a pointless question. It just does. All right. I mean, at some level, they're taking the position to brute fact. To brute
yeah.
fact that there's existence. The why we can't ever really understand. Maybe there is no reason, right? It's the equivalent of saying, like within even the Dvaitins will agree with this part, and the Advaitins, all the traditions do. The universe is anadi, without beginning. Like they don't offer a reason why Ishvara somehow magically started creating everything. They just say that it just is. There was never a time when creation never was, or the universe never was. It goes in and out of him. It ultimately, that's the same argument, right? We're all left at the core of asking the question of why someone. The Christians and Muslims have an answer. I think it's utterly insufficient, but their answer is, well, God wills it. Well, I mean, that doesn't make any sense, because why does he will it? Then you have to ask that question. Well, he desired. If he's omnipotent or omniscient, why does he desire anything? I mean, these are all, but at least in the Hindu Buddhist Jain context, they're asserting a brute fact. It just is.
So yeah, I mean, we can call it a brute fact. Sure, we can call it a brute fact, but then there are distinctions in the brute fact, and as you pointed out, uh, I'm delighted that you pointed this out, because in Western philosophy, particularly, I think David Hume makes this move that we don't need to ask that question, why does the entire series exist? If the particulars are explained, if the dependents are explained by a prior dependent and that dependent by another prior dependent, what's the fuss about this entire series? There is nothing called the series. It's in the mind. The series is not an entity. The particulars are the entity, and they are explained. Everything is explained. But then those who accept strong PSR, and in the slide I've mentioned that in the commentary to Tattva Sankhyan, I think Jayatirtha makes this statement that the limit
Can you
of
tell
the
everyone what PSR is?
yeah, sure. So PSR is basically the principle of sufficient reasoning. It can be traced back to the to Plato, Aristotle, but generally we in the modern time we take the formulation from Leibniz. So Leibniz was the first one to place it out, put it out nicely, that anything which occurs, which is not self-explanatory or not explained by itself, kind of requires something else to be explained, meaning any fact that obtains, there is a sufficient explanation for it. For any fact X, if it obtains in the universe, in the existence, there should be some sufficient explanation to why it occurs or why it is the way it is. So this is PSR, or principle of sufficient reason. In toto, you have two versions of it. One is a weak PSR and the other one is a strong PSR. The weak PSR says that not everything has a sufficient explanation. Sure, certain things have sufficient explanation. So the particulars have a sufficient explanation. If someone asks, what is the sufficient explanation that this microphone exists, you can give bunch of good chunk of immediate causes, right? What is the sufficient explanation that you guys are having this stream on YouTube right now? We can give chunk of immediate causes that we had this in the mind for a couple of months, and now we thought let's get the show on the road, and therefore we are here. In the same way, when you talk about other particulars, you can give explanations to why they are the way they are. But when you talk about the universe itself, because weak PSR says that not everything has or has to have an explanation, we can keep the universe outside the scope, right?
Well,
So
I
this
mean,
is
so let me add something to this, because I think this is where it's interesting, because the strong PSR is really requesting a final or ultimate reason for why things are, right? Where, like that's like a super strong PSR, but that actually in and of itself isn't really that strong. It's just kicking the set into a prior reason for the set, right? Like, so let's say the set is a universe existence. Now you're just the same thing. What I'm saying about this microphone exists because these variety of factors, which includes material reasons, material causes, efficient causes, my telos for why the mic was created, but it doesn't tell me why the mic was created based upon why I was created or why the materials were created. So the question is, like, when you talk about the universe in a strong PSR, all you're saying is, let me just find the ultimate reason for why the universe exists, not the question of why the entity that may have created the universe existed, or why the entity decided to do that, or what caused him to decide to. So we make up these terms like, oh yeah, uncaused cause, or like the prime mover kind of thing, like uncaused cause, right? The idea that the universe has this cause, but that cause didn't have a cause. Well, why didn't it have a cause? Well, he or she was willing it to occur because they desired it. Where does that desire come from, right? If you ask those questions, then you have to find a strong PSR for God. But then you have to say, well, God just. But this answer is provided by the Dvaitins and the Brahma Sutrans out of pure sport. He has no other purpose but to play and to experience, right? And there is an element here to say in that explanation, because the term play is doing heavy lifting. It's doing all the lifting, in fact, right?
Yeah.
For one's own nature of desiring to sport or to be, to exist, to be dynamic. That's why creation occurs. There's no will for it in that sense, right? There's no need or desire in that sense. It's just the nature of the Lord or Brahman itself to express itself. And that's where creation comes from, right? So, but this what I'm saying is like, but that answer is the equivalent of saying, well, this exists because it does exist. It's its nature to exist, right?
You can see
And this is what I'm saying. Sometimes that argument, if you go deep enough, I feel like it's not the best. I mean, what are your thoughts?
No, I mean, yeah, I do understand that. And as I said, if you would have asked the same thing to me 2 months ago, I would have been on your side. I would have said, yes, you're right. And I used to think that. But then when I think of what are we demanding when we talk about explanations, let's think about it. Let's ponder upon it. Can we arbitrarily stop the demand of explanation? Wouldn't that be very convenient? To say that certain things in the universe would have explanation, but the universe itself, if you talk about the universe itself, well, we are going to be a little cheeky there, and we are not going to apply PSR, which we had been applying on everything within the universe. But because it is the universe, and because we don't think that PSR is necessarily something that is can be applied or should be applied to everything, let's keep the universe outside of it. I feel that's very convenient.
Yeah,
Because
but I don't think that's what's happening. I think what's happening is, like, we are positing the reason for the universe, and at least from this perspective, is that ultimately, like, universe is the sufficient reason for the particulars. Now, the question you're asking is, what's the sufficient reason for the universe? And our response would be the universe itself, because the universe itself is not merely a thing, it's all things. And it's the state of all things before things even exist, right? At some level, right? It's like, there's this mound of clay, and that clay becomes pot, it becomes whatever, tablets and things of that, the question is, well, now the question we ask is, why is there this pot? We could say, well, it comes from the clay. The question you're asking is, why is there clay? And then we have to make a claim of why clay is, unless we say clay is inherently it's existing. It always exists.
Yeah. In other words, we are saying that the universe could be the necessary being. What's the problem with that? Is a universe a thing separate from the parts? Let's let's talk about that. When you talk about the universe, are we not treating the universe as a separate entity if you're saying that the parts are somehow dependent, but the universe is not dependent?
Well,
If that's
it's
the case,
equivalent of
then
asking. It's equivalent of asking, is being different from beings? Right. So I would say, like, sure, but not completely, right? Because beings depend on being for their existence. In the very term, it's just there's some sort of regression here going on, right? Like, so in the same way, pots depend on clay for their existence, and the clay depends on clayness. Its inherent existence to exist, right? It is of itself existing. So the issue is always going to be. I feel like the problem with the universe is because we observe a creation or we assume a creation that we think it's not eternal. What if the state of the universe was that it's always been here? It always will be. This question wouldn't arise.
but then what part of the universe are we talking about? Because
All of it.
even the particulars, even let's say the microphone in my hand, we can't say it is eternal.
It is
Definitely
eternal. We call this a
in
microphone.
the form of its substance, right?
Yeah, we call this a microphone, but those parts or those many parts,
The
it
substance of
exists.
it. So basically the parts can be temporal, but the clay itself is eternal. That's what you're.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
Namarupa form, right? Which is exactly
yeah.
what our tradition would say, or the Hindu tradition on the whole says, right? Like these things are, I guess they use the word now mereological nihilism, but I'm not sure that that is the exact way I'd approach it. It's these things exist, they're real, they're temporary, but they don't stop existing. Like the thing we call a mic, we call it a mic because we've added these concepts onto it, although it's just made of matter of some form of energy, right?
But then in that case, I think something that Jayatirtha anticipates in his commentary, like the first objection he takes is exactly the one that you pointed out. That what if the stuff itself is necessary and everything else is just nama rupa? Then what you're doing is you're basically saying that there is nothing called contingency and dependency. It's just conceptual. Nothing dependent exists. But then you have pratyaksh pramana that dependents do exist. So you would have a problem to deal with, because on one side you want to say that the clay is necessary, the clay is eternal, independent, but then if the clay is identical or is something that transforms and becomes the nama rupa, then how can the nama rupa be contingent? The nama rupa would also have to be necessary, and if they are necessary, then the class of contingency is just conceptual. It is something that we create, and in reality there's nothing dependent or there's nothing contingency. Everything is maya, or every
Well,
contingent entity is just an illusion, something
no,
like that.
so I reject that idea. I reject the idea that everything's illusion. I think everything is real. You can call it different things. It's again the same concept. Like, we call water water, even though it's in the form of ice or liquid or gas, whatever it is. It looks different, it feels different. It looks like it's going from one state to another. Now, again, those things are real. The change is real. No one's arguing that change isn't real. So the question is, we're having two separate engagements. One is a material thing the real thing, and are these concepts also real? Right. That's what we're saying. So when we call something a mic, there's a concept of we define this thing as a mic for whatever purpose, right? Like it produces sound or holds sound, all this other stuff, right? Is a physical structure, and then we put all these qualities together and call it a mic. No one's arguing that the material nature of the mic doesn't exist, right? The question is whether the conceptual nature is just as real in existence eternally as the mic itself. And one can say maybe it does exist eternally. It exists in the realm of forms, as Plato would say, or in the realm of ideas. I haven't fully demarcated that because, again, if we think about this in Sankhyan categories, if the mind is part of prakritic elements, and is part of the nature of prakriti, then it would exist. It exists in subtle nature in all things. And then, like when the particulates form into what the shape of a mic is and function of a mic, then that micness comes out, right? So it's inherent, like the seed is inherent I mean, the tree's inherent to the seed, even though you can't call that thing a tree yet because it hasn't manifested. The same way, these things that we all see around us are real, but in their particular formation, they become manifest as that particular thing, and then they go unmanifest when those formations break apart. So ultimately, these things are all real. These changes are real. These things, I mean, Prakriti is real. It's taking on these forms. So I guess I would say in that sense, it's, to me, independent or necessary. King Kong hasn't spoken, but why don't you go first, Vineet, and then let King Kong go?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just wrap it up. I can see that objection as a potent, alternative to this entire contingency argument and this distinction between necessary and contingency. But as I said, just to wrap it up, what we were discussing about initially, that how what the Western philosophers have discussed, we have the parallels in Indian philosophy. This one is a right example here, the Duetin version of the contingency argument. And even in the commentary itself, you have Jayatirtha hinting at the fact that he was aware at that time of the strong PSR version as well, when he says the limits of dependency cannot be dependency itself, which we can compare with our contemporary theologian and philosopher Alexander Proust, who has the same a similar verbatim thing to say about it. So on that note, yeah, this was the Dwayne version of the contingency argument, and let's go to Kong. Let's see like what he has to say about this entire thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So couple of things. So I think the discussion has been raised, 3 or 4 notches higher than the previous one in this situation. So okay, I think I would hark back to the comment that I made when we started off with the contingency argument regarding this universe. I think that's what I was trying to point at, that it depends upon how you think or define the word universe. If it's a total, and by total I mean there's nothing of it, of the entity called universe, that is apart from its parts, and if all those parts are dependent or contingent for that matter, then the entirety would be dependent on what? On those parts. And yes, then that would persuade you to go down the rabbit hole and posit something that's that grounds these parts. Now you can extend the meaning of the word universe, and I think it gets tricky in this discussions by using a very vague, or by vague I don't mean that it's not clear, but rather in these situations, how do you pass out universe and what its essence is becomes unclear. But rather, if I go in that route, if I take a non-theistic understanding that behind these particulars, behind the stars, the galaxies, the novas, and all of this, there is, let's say, a necessary being, and that necessary being is the background energy of the universe, or the space-time manifold from which all of this rises. Then I think the argument for contingency succeeds, because all that this argument promises to give its seeker or its reader is that there must be a necessary being, and that can be anything. That can be quantum wave fields, that can be meteorological symbols, that can be the impersonal one of the Neoplatonists, right? And the second part about what its nature is something where the real wrestling starts, and it's on the shoulder of the theists to show it, verily so, rightfully so. So that would be how I see the conglomeration understanding of things. Now, regarding the Sankhyan view, Mukunda, that you espoused, I think that the idea now shifts from. So there are 2 different understanding of contingency. One would be it could have happened differently in a different possible world. However you think about the possible worlds and its essence. The second one, or I think that which was more in the classical sense, is that it is dependent. Now, as I have previously stated, even if the opponent here takes the position that all of this causal chain is necessary, right? That it couldn't have been otherwise, because in order for it to be otherwise, the link or node in that chain has to be different. Even if I grant that, this entire series of dependency is terminated, the entire series of necessarily dependent entities is terminated in a necessary entity itself. So the dependency runs down and is stuck, or rather flows out from this ground of being, if I may use that word. And it's it does show again, but it can be universe, it can be prime matter, it can be all sorts of impersonal entities, right? Secondly, I would like to point out that this is tangential, Mukunda, but in the Western, or rather in the modern Western discourse on the arguments for the existence of God, out of this family of arguments called the cosmological arguments, the most out there, the most shining personality is that of the Kalam, right? And I think the core premise that kind of protects, or that on which the Kalam stands, is that of the fact that infinities cannot be traversed. Now, I must make a very important point, and I think Vineet has made it before, and Mukunda, I think you're also aware of the fact that the Kalam believes, or the Kalam presumes, that the chain of causation is temporal rather than hierarchical, right? So someone like Plotinus, someone like Plato, or even Aquinas, and the modern contemporary philosopher and writer Ed Feser takes rather than a temporal sequential series of causation, he takes a hierarchical series of causation, right? So something which would be like, what does the chandelier depends upon for it to, hang midair? Well, the first link of the chain. And what does it depend upon? The other link of the chain, and so on. Now, none of these dependencies are passed out in time. It's happening simultaneously, and it ends at the hook from the ceiling that sustains this entire set. Now, within the Kalam, it's something that there must be a beginning point in time, right? And I think with developments in mathematics, with developments in cosmological ideas, I think it's a very weaker version of the cosmological arguments that tries to say for sure that there cannot be an infinite past. Well, there are different sorts of thought experiments that William Lane Craig and others, the proponents of the Kalam argument, tries to show, like the bonarity paradox. How come you count down from infinity and all, to kind of strike intuition
So if
that
I could
this
ask a
cannot be so.
question,
Yeah,
Kong.
yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
So when it comes to this idea of infinite past, is the assumption of infinite past of a oscillating universe, or just a single universe with the past?
Well, I think they take both, because even if it is an oscillating universe, they would presume that between two universes, between the birth and the death of one universe and the second universe, this gap is connected through a moment in time. Hence, you have precession and successions, right? Something precedes something and succeeds something. So in that sense, there's a temporal before and after.
Right, but so that question is, how would you say there's no actual infinite in those contexts?
Well, the assumption that the proponents of the Kalam argument tries to first show that there's an impossible. So they don't say there's an impossibility in the sense of a strict contradiction. They try to show that it is metaphysically impossible. Now, the interesting part is that this
Yeah, it
word
was something like,
metaphysically.
I think I just saw William Lane Craig on talking with Alex Malpass around some of this stuff, right? About this idea of counting to infinity versus counting from infinity, and I mean, I don't mean to sound flippant, but a part of me is like, bro, yeah, I think we're just kind of like coming up with ideas and games in our head to get around this idea. Like, it seems to me pretty intuitive. And as you know, maybe intuition could be wrong here too. And that, to be fair, is it's pretty intuitive that there can be actual infinity. Um, I don't understand how it would be counterintuitive for there to be an actual infinity, nor do I understand how one can argue that an actual infinity couldn't exist metaphysically. Like, I get it, like it's like Zeno's paradox in some sense, is there, if you keep cutting a thing in half and half and half, can you ever get to, uh, the smallest unit? You couldn't. I mean, because these are definitional things, right? At some level, we're talking about definitions here. I'm not sure if we're really talking about reality. I don't know. Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, so firstly, I don't see intuitively, again, Mukunda, all we have is our intuitions. Intuitions are our friend in this maze of trying to figure out what's true or not. And what philosophers or thinkers would do is try to pump your intuitions towards a particular worldview, right? They would make cases. Now, the interesting point is that he makes up, so Craig brings up the idea of the Hilbert Hotel, right? That it's so absurd that if you deduct infinity from infinity, there would be infinity. But Alex Malpass and Wes Morriston, and they have written papers, they have exchanged papers, and I think have shown pretty clearly and in a very lucid manner, if someone has the patience to sit through those understanding. It's interesting, nonetheless, that there's nothing weird in the sense that you must throw away about the natures of infinities, right? Things can be weird, things can be absurd, right? It might not strike our own intuitive functions. Creatio ex nihilo is weird, it's counterintuitive, because we don't see things coming out without a material cause. Like if you go across a woodlands and you ask a carpenter who's making his house that, what is the stuff that you make your house from? And he says that, well, I have created out of nothing, I have willed it into existence. You would be like, that doesn't sound right, because all instances that we see around of causation does take into consideration a material cause. Now, the idea that Malpass wants to bring in is that in the mathematics, in the operations of infinite sets, our understanding of how addition, subtraction works in finite situations don't apply. And there's nothing wrong about it, because that's how the natures of infinite sets are. And regarding the actual infinity, so for Craig, it's rather a metaphysical impossibility rather than a contradiction or a strict contradiction of logic. Now, look at the things get a bit weird and foggy when you go into this idea of metaphysically impossible, right? Because you just can't pass out that how do you think it is metaphysically impossible? And one of the ways that Craig tries to go into it is that one of it would be Hilbert's Hotel. The other would be, you can't successively add and complete an infinite series, right? So if I start counting from today 0, 1, 2 each day, I will never reach infinity. And from there, he draws the intuition that the opposite, counting from infinity, right? Minus 5, minus 4, minus 3, minus 2, minus 1, 0, cannot be done too.
Right.
Now, this is where Malpass attacks and says that I don't see how it follows, because these two cases are different. Because you never start. So one of the things that a lot of proponents of Kalam who are not well versed in the idea, or rather it evades their apparent vision, is the fact that you are counting from infinity as if infinity is a point in the timeline.
Yeah.
Infinity is not a point in the timeline. It's the cardinality of a set. It's the measure of the elements or the members of that set, right? So it's never a point that the universe started counting from a day that this is point 1 and we start now.
Had it been so, then of course it would be different, and you wouldn't have completed infinity. But the counting never began, or rather, there was never a counting. To be honest, all these countings are something we abstract out and we project onto that. It's just that moments of time just passed, and there's nothing counterintuitive, because if you take the timeline, if you pick any moment in the past and the present moment, doesn't matter how many trillions or gazillion years are between these 2 points, it's still finite,
Right.
hence traversable, right? So I think Kalam is more of the weaker side of the cosmological arguments, because we see all the stalwarts from antiquity, and rightfully so, Plotinus, Plato, Aristotle, our scholars, theologians, even the Neoplatonists, right, Proclus and all, they assume, and they have reasons. It's not just a priori assumptions. They have a reason that the effect must necessarily be past eternal, because
Right.
if the one, as you said, and Craig gives a very bizarre, I mean, I don't want to say bizarre, but it's a funny example, that why did God create today? Like, why did God create 13.8 billion years ago? Why couldn't he have done it 20.4 billion years ago? Well, Craig says that, think of a timeless man who's sitting through eternity, and one day he thinks he's going to stand up. Well, it just doesn't make sense, because what caused him to change? And
Right.
he, being a libertarian, I do think would come across the problem. Then is the will of God contingent? Could it have been otherwise?
Right. And
Right?
that's the thing I brought up much earlier, is like, what causes, why did he desire to create? Right. What is the desire for that? Like, want, need, and those are the things where it's like, I don't think Christianity gives, especially like Craig and like that. He and people like him give good responses. Right. Now, I think the metaphysical response to infinity, or the fact that it cannot be metaphysically true, I think that's nonsense. Like, at the end of the day, like, infinity is true. We know we can experience it. Like, I can have let me say, an infinite experience of joy, which I can't put into words. It doesn't mean because I can't quantify it, that it's now a metaphysical impossibility or something like that. And I would even say, like, I think the Malpass's arguments around this were strong. So for me, I would say, ultimately, the bigger question is he, and my problem with Craig has always been, or these thinkers, is they start from a position and work backwards, right? He's trying to prove a particular point, not trying to understand how things work or how it would work. He's got to show that the universe is first created in a point in time. So he must discard infinity. He can't take in the possibility infinity actually exists. Secondly, he's got to also accept that the universe itself is not the origin of all things. It must be something outside the universe. So he already has to accept these things as true, and then he has to reason his way to it. And I think, like, in some sense, like, I take the position, this is how I approach this, is if I take my text to be true, and my tradition's interpretation of that text, like, like the concepts, then I just take that. I'm not going to argue for it. I'm not going to, like, the proof of God to me means nothing. Like, I don't think you can prove it. I don't think you cannot prove it. I just think you either have experience of it and know it, or you accept it through the Shastras or any particular text. Now, you could attack particular texts. Like, you could, like, if you accept the pramana of the Bible or the Quran, we can go after the Bible or Quran and show why it should not be a pramana. The same thing you can do with the Vedic text or the Upanishads, and I think those are fair points. But I will say that I think these arguments around trying to prove or substantiate or reason your way to some sort of deity just because you want to show that it's reasonable is just dumb to me. Because I don't understand how that would work well. So which is why I'm much more in favor of breaking down these arguments than I am of building them up.
So before Vineet chimes in, I just wanted to land a couple of points. Even if I grant Craig
all that he needs for the argument to run, still I don't see how actual infinity, or even the fact that the universe is infinite in the past, or rather or the whole set of universes, let's say, or the whole shebang of existence continue to be past eternal, is improbable or is impossible. One thing that I think Vineet and Mukunda, you have seen in the conversation with these proponents of Kalam, is that while they try to show you a counterintuitive situation that would arise if actual infinities exist, there's a certain smuggling of a beginning in a beginningless past. When the assumption is the fact that it is beginningless, then there's no point in trying to, subsume or try to slide under the carpet that there was a beginning. That's just not how things are. You see, is it weird? Of course, it's weird. It's as weird as creatio ex nihilo. It's as weird as any other theories of primary origin. And secondly, I would say that as it is the case within the contingency argument and the Kalam, the step 2 is actually the main crown jewel in which the fight begins. That you need to show that this necessary being is God, a personal entity that kicks this chain. And moreover, the extra steps are taken when you say that this entity is the God of our religion, right? It has its whims and fancies, etc., etc. It has its chosen tribe of people from a particular state after a period of 13.8 billion years, right? And I think there's a lot of work and cumulative arguments from experience, from consciousness comes into play at that stage. But a trivia that I want to share is that how Aristotle passed it out. So for Aristotle, all things that are in motion is material, and it can be even the realms of the stars, right? Because they're changing. They don't need to be as material as your wooden chair is. Then Aristotle thinks that if all things that are material is changing, and change is the property of matter, then this thing must be immaterial. This thing must be eternal, because it has to be always for it to shed its being to other entities. It must be timeless in the sense, because there's of course an entire literature of ink spilled on this, that how timelessness or in time attached to this necessary being and aka God. So for Aristotle, it's timeless. Now the argument that Aristotle, Plotinus gives on this argument is that as this entity is pure actuality, or as Aquinas would say, actus purus, its effect must necessarily be emanating from it from the time it has ever been. And there was no time that it was never not. Hence, its effect is eternal as it is. So the Neoplatonists actually turn the argument on the Kalam and say that, look, if you have an actual cause, right, through eternity, then its effect too must be actual. Otherwise, there would be change within the very essence of that immense being. You see, and I think there's a certain push, a certain intuitive push towards this, which I think is shared between the Neoplatonic, the Hellenic scholars, even the Stoics for that matter, Mukunda. The examples, the counter examples that you gave to Vineet, a Stoic would actually say something similar to this, that why don't we suppose that the entire universe is a rational entity that has existed, and the parts or the organs that you see are basically modes, something more like in a Spinozian sense. Well, the mode is not identical to the substance, but the mode cannot exist at all apart from that one substance, right? So yeah, that would be it. And I think in present times in academia and in literature, Alex Malpass and Wes Morriston has given a good push towards this Kalam argument, as well as Joe Schmid, who has done a couple of series on Kalam, as well as the Grim Reaper paradox.
So a small, I would like to wrap it up. That I think in keeping in mind the brevity of time, the Grim Reaper paradox is a particular paradox that is made out, or it's trying. It's the thinkers try to show you that what would happen if infinite chains are there. But Alex Malpass in his video on Skydive Phil, the YouTube channel Skydive Phil that has done, it is a non-theistic channel, and it criticizes in an academic sense the common arguments of fine-tuning, ontological argument, etc. from his YouTube channel. So on that series, he does make a statement that, look, you see the color pink around you. Yes, you see the animal cow, right? But if you mix together these two entities and you say, well, there's a pink cow, you see, well, it doesn't mean that due to the non-existence of the pink cow, the color pink or the animal cow cannot not exist, right? So certain infinite chains or these thought experiments, the problem with these thought experiments are that a lot of these things are made out in a manner that it would yield a contradiction. But it doesn't follow from there that every single infinite chains, whether temporal or in certain situations in a gunk universe or in a junk universe where everything is just descending of parts, it must be the case, right? That from one particular thought experiment of a scenario, you tease out that all infinite chains are improbable or impossible. That just doesn't follow, right? So yeah, that would be it, Mukunda. And if we have a few more moments, I just wanted to share some of my thoughts on the evolution, the difference or the similarities of evolution of philosophy from in the Western tradition, from their scriptures, if I may use that word, and from ours. Can I just go on for So I think we know that the Malaysians, it's actually a kind of a set out truth in academia that Thales, Anaximander, Anaximenes are kind of breaking off from their mythical traditions of Homer, Hesiod, Orpheus, right? That the gods like Zeus and Aphrodite and Athena, they tinkle with the physical substances, and somehow that's how the universe works. But I don't think that's truly the case. They do have a more sophisticated version, and rightfully so, because epics are made for a different audience, philosophy for the others. Yet they do accept, starting from Thales to Anaxagoras, that there's a mind, there's an intelligent mind that governs all of this. And the argument that Anaxagoras gives is exactly similar to what Udayanacharya gives, that all these simples, all these blobs of matter cannot arrange themselves in this orderly fashion. There must be a nous, a mind, an intelligent mind that grounds this and projects rationality. And you see this similarly in our tradition. The idea is that the Samhitas are blabberings of war bands, pastoralist war bands. But when you delve into this, you see almost, if not all, but then certainly the most major philosophical premises are already embedded in a seed form within the Samhitas. I'm not even going into the Upanishads. Vineet pointed out on the Vishwakarma Sukta that in the Ajasya Nabha, the navel of the unborn, the gods in their potential form before emerging out as manifestations, as well as the worlds, are resting on him. Now, Vishwakarma over here can be, I feel that at an apparent reading of the text, it is Purusha, and rightfully so, it becomes Vishnu within the Itihasa Purana tradition, right? We know the entire Hiranyagarbha, the golden egg, emerging from his navel. Similarly, the idea that all these multifarious visions that you see around you of divinity is nothing but emanations, forms, names of the one is established within Ekam Satya Pravahuda Vadanti, which is again a very famous hymn of the Rishi Dirghatamas, right? From who becomes a very significant character in Mahabharata. He sees, based on his name, he's unending darkness, and he has this glimpse within the Samhitas that all these are one. There's this one principle. There's this one. It's not impersonal, by the way. It's very personal in the sense it's supra-personal, right? It's not a personality like you and me. You see, and it emanates, it gives its name, it lends its attributes to reality. Chandogya comes to my mind. The famous maxim "ex nihilo nihil fit." From nothing, nothing comes. I mean, from this is like, and this is the maxim from which all problem starts. Right, the entire journey of contingency argument starts from here. And in Chandogya Upanishad, Shvetaketu is actually told by his father Aruni Uddalaka that existence has to come from existence. And Uddalaka presents the argument of a different schools, probably a very proto, let's say, nihilistic schools, nihilistic in the sense of ontological nihilism, that there is nothing, and from there, whoosh, an entire shebang of things come out. And he says that even if it's nothing, it must be nothing in the sense of unmanifested. Because Shvetaketu, you see, from nothing comes. It's the most intuitive thing that you can think of, right? I think the mantra is somasya iti agre, right? That there was this one being at the beginning in the agre, in the primary sense. And in the next verse, it says that it desired to be many, and hence it emanates all this multiplicity. Now, you don't need to read a substance monist idea into all these statements, but what is, or rather what can be teased out from this, is that the Vedic mind understood pretty well that there was this primary ground of being which attaches, or rather which unites all of these multifarious things that you see around within itself, in itself, through itself. You see, as well as that, even the Mimamsakas, who are like this radical, non-theists, who just say that do actions, and actions would like kind of twerk in the fabric of cosmos to give you the karma phala, the adrishta. You see this in the Vedas, in the Samhitas, in the statement of Rita, that Rita is like this cosmic principle that governs all things. It's something, it's that which sustains the gods and men, and gods and men sustains it. And there's this give and take relation which further fleshes out itself in the Purusha Sukta, in the mantra that with the sacrifice was done, and the gods did this primordial sacrifice and ascended the heavens like the ascetics of old, right? And the idea that there is nothing beyond the sacrifice, the sacrifice, this act of being pure actuality, this giving, this shedding of being to all things, is yajna. And the fun part is that who is this yajna? It is Purusha, it is Vishnu, it is Narayana, because being gives being from itself to the others, right? And it is this inexhaustible source. So you see such gems, these seeds that are hidden in this forest, in these meadows of Vedas, that are unlooked by people who just would think that after Buddha entered parinirvana, the Brahmanical mind started to think because it had an impending danger from the Nastikas. It's not so the case, because had it been so, then the shamanic traditions as well as the Brahmanic traditions wouldn't have arisen from its roots, i.e. the Vedas. I mean, we can go on, with this for a long time, but I would like to show this this nuance that's lost in today's conversation most of the time, in day-to-day academic conversation of this era, this age.
I said, yeah, Vinny, do you want to go ahead? Respond to that?
No, just quickly 2 points that I think related to infinity that we were talking about. So I think King Kong mentioned that how we can have infinity and then we can add to infinity. I feel if I have to quickly summarize whatever that King Kong talked about, and the objections that the Abrahamics throw at the Hindus, it's basically that you cannot have an actual infinity, then you cannot add to infinity, and you cannot complete infinity. But then something that whatever that King Kong said was suffices to show that there is no such impossibility in an actual infinity. And I would like to quote, or not quote, but mention something from Cantorian set theory as well. So this is a mathematical fact that you can add to infinity, and you can have greater infinities. So there's something called as transfinite number. You have an infinity, and then you have a greater infinity than that infinity. Take for example the set of infinite things. Let's say you have a set which contains infinite things, or let's say a set of natural numbers which has infinite numbers in it. You can create in any infinite set infinite subsets. Now this set, which includes the already existing infinite things plus the infinite subset, would obviously be a greater infinity. So this entire thing that the Kalam apologetics, they argue that you cannot add to infinity, gets debunked by established mathematics itself. You can have greater infinities even though the past is infinite. It can still go on, right? You can still have new moments in it. And yeah, that's something, kind of what's off this thread that they're trying to bring. And as King Kong said, if this is counterintuitive, then well, your ex nihilo is as counterintuitive as well. So why not drop that and come to our camp?
Yeah. And look, I think there was a lot there. I think, yeah. So that's like a whole separate conversation to discuss the nature of Shastra ritual and how that plays out in the philosophical realm. Because some people think that ritual is simply just something you do over here and it doesn't have any real philosophy behind it or any idea behind it. And I think this is a deep problem, especially when talking about, like, I mean, I hate sometimes being mean about this, but like in the Hindu fold, especially in the Vedic tradition, the nature of ritual is utterly, well, there's similarities with the Christian, like Eucharist or whatever, but that's not like, it's not even remotely the same, right? The level of symbolism and the level of uh, of rigor involved in Vedic ritualism, whether it's a yajna or later non-Vedic temple worship and practices there, it's much more uh, heavy. And so let's say that. So I do have to close out very soon because I got
Nope.
it's Mother's Day for me, so I have to
Yeah.
spend time with my family. But I do you guys have any last thoughts on this? Because I do think we covered quite a bit, and we'll come back to a good amount of this stuff down the line. And now we're getting our viewer count up at 2.5 hours in. Maybe that's next time we can move the conversation a little bit later. But I will say this was a good start, for our series. This contingency argument is interesting from a variety of perspectives because it does. I mean, like, yeah, the cosmological contingency arguments kind of like overlap and coalesce. I do want to spend. I would love to down the line go more deeply into the theological engagement with Christian or Islamic doctrines about, for example, like their end of days, their salvation, their theodicies, and so on and so forth, because I think those are important. But do you guys have any last thoughts before we close out? And yeah, go ahead.
I mean, no, I mean it was great. The points that we touched upon. This is what I thought initially. For a starting video, this is perfect. Yeah, and as we do more of this, we will delve deeper into comparative theology, obviously, and that would be something that has been due for a long from our side, from the Hindu side, and I hope people would welcome it and will the content that we are presenting will get appreciated. Just one point very quickly about something that King Kong said. I mean, and I've heard this from atheists a lot, and I'll wrap it up with this one point that people think that the contingency argument need not be given for God's existence because hey, at the end of the day, it just wants to prove a necessary being. I completely disagree with that. If the argument does not prove God, then it fails. Even if it proves universe as a necessary being, that's not why the argument was initially introduced by the theists. The goal is to prove God, and in my personal view, I think the contingency argument given by Western theologians or Indian theologians, especially Dvaita Vedanta, I think it kind of does the work. Yeah.
Kong?
Yeah. So, firstly, thank you, Mukunda, again to bring us, to this platform to share our views. It's just, a small
segment in this great month on this great churning that has been going on for 4,000 years, I presume, since past eternity, right, through kalpas and eons. But this is what we are sharing, this small ideas that we can gather up for this vast tradition of ours. Not only just the traditions of Advaita, Advaita, Vishtadvaita, but rather, the six schools of Indian philosophy, of Hindu philosophy, as well as the Nastikas, right, the Jainas and the Buddhas. I think there's a certain, I don't know, might be it is deliberate, might be it is, something that just, people couldn't terse out or attention due to this overwhelming amount of literature and stalwarts that our history, our human history has produced. But I think it's time to shed light on our traditions, on the traditions of this land. And secondly, I would say that I think the closing remarks that I would want to make is, in today's culture of fierce debates, it's not that fierceness itself in a dialogue or in a debate is wrong or it's a vice, but what it leads to, this rabid culture of we have to defeat the other or the opponent and so on and so forth without even scrutinizing our premises, has to be done away with, right? This pushback, this mature pushback, and the building of this conversation is something that I think would give rise to a very blossoming culture of Indic philosophy. And that's that, Mukunda. I think it's past our stipulated time. I was
I
hoping
don't
we
worry
could
that
get
much about
some.
stipulated time and stuff. The universe is infinite, even though William Willey corrects us it isn't. So, nonetheless,
Well, we have infinite kalpas in our
yeah.
hand
I would
to go
also say,
on
like,
meandering.
so I think this is very needed. And look, I think there are some people that do some stuff like this in Hindi language, which is good. I think to cover some of that. But for me, I think the thing that's important is doing this in English, engaging, like the fact that Vineet has a background in Western thought. And I didn't finish my master's. I was doing my master's in continental philosophy, and I did my law degree. But I think that's a good place to have inter traditional conversations, like philosophical traditional conversations, and theological and religious. So I would love, over time, for us to delve deeper. And I want like Muslims and Christians and atheists to come join us if they want to push back or have debate or engage in important conversations on this, because I think it's very important, especially with bringing in the Indian. I use the word Indian, but let's just say Eastern perspective into a lot of these conversations, because it does change the way we think about the world. It does hopefully affect the way we can think deeply, more critically. Not to say that doesn't happen in Western thought or on the whole, but just adding more to the pot does not hurt us. So I hope everyone joins us again on the next few endeavors and grows this movement desire to have India engage with everyone else.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
All right,
Thank you,
guys.
Vineet. Thank you, Mukunda, for your time and your ideas. Loved it. See you next time.
Yeah, so we'll do the outro, guys, and we'll talk soon. So we'll keep the Vishnu on, because I think he is the universal one. So
Yes,
let's
necessary being. Yep.
yeah, that's right. All right,
True
everyone.
infinite.
Follow Philosopha, follow King Kong on Twitter, and then let's keep the conversation going.
पावन मुनि जन यमुना तीरे पावन मुनि जन यमुना तीरे गायती वनमाली गायती वनमाली गायति वनमाली